Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for the second event of the semester in the Southwest Minnesota State University Visiting Writers Series. I am Marianne Murphy-Zarzana, the director of the Creative Writing Program here at SMSU. Tonight I'm very pleased to introduce James A. Zarzana. Originally from Sacramento, Jim holds an MA in English from Sacramento State University. After teaching high school in Sacramento, he earned a PhD in English specializing in British fiction from the University of Notre Dame. In 1989, he joined the English department at Southwest Minnesota State University, and when he retired in 2015, he was awarded emeritus status. The speculative science fiction novel, The Marsco Dissident, which is right over here, the initial novel of the Marsco Saga, was his first published novel. Along with the second of the four novels, Marsco Triumphant, published last spring, these works tell the story of a post-nationhood world where a single megacorporation, Marsco, controls everything via its absolute management of computer usage. The Marsco Sustainability Project, Book 3, tells of the final years of this dystopian future. The Ascendancy of Marsco, Book 4, is the prequel to the nightmare world of Marsco. As a novelist, Zarzana calls himself a writer of speculative science fiction, not a science fiction writer. Character development, political machinations, and theme drive his works. Marsco uses raw power to control and dictate who and what it wants. It is this conflict between humans and the abuse of power by monolithic political entities that Zarzana explores. In addition to his speculative fiction, he's also working on a novel about the Academy, which is either a comic look at the incongruous drama of university life or a serious look at the unintended absurdity of university life. The Kirkus Reviews noted of the Marsco Dissident that the scale of Zarzana's imagination is practically Asimovian. Socioeconomic sci-fi on a broad canvas that reads like dire headlines from tomorrow. I'm also very pleased to introduce writer Steve Linstrom, who will be moderating the conversation today. Steve is the author of two novels, The Last Ram and The Murder Trial of the Last Lakota Warrior. Steve is working on a new novel along the lines of his first two novels, which will tell the story of the Lakota vote for the Dawes Act in 1889. The government needed to get 3/4 of the Lakota male population to agree to give up 9 million acres of unneeded land from their reservation. The book follows 3 young people involved with the vote. After the reading, you may purchase books by both authors and have them signed. Please join me in a warm welcome for Jim and Steve.
Thanks, everyone. What I'm going to do is moderate. I've got some questions, and I'll try to stump the expert here. But we want to make sure it's interactive. So if you have questions, try to catch my eye, and that way Jim doesn't have to try to figure out where the questions are coming from. And we'll call on you and try to get all your questions answered. In addition, I have some note cards here and up at the back too. If you want to write down, Jim's promised to answer questions about anything except for the election and Notre Dame football. Or you may answer them, you just may not want to hear what he has to say. So with that, Jim, why don't you introduce us to the Marsco Saga?
Okay. Well, the best way to talk about the saga is talk a little bit about how it's written, because I do want to also talk about the writing process. So actually in BA 224, just around the corner over here, that's where my academic office was. And in 1997, that's how long ago, for some of you I think that's quite a long time ago, that's when I started it. I was going to have a sabbatical for a semester starting in August. So from August to January, 98, I wasn't going to teach. So it's April 15th, easy day to remember. I got everything done in my office and I started writing. And I wrote for 2 weeks, every afternoon for 2 hours before I would go home. I didn't tell Marianne and our daughter Elaine until I'd written for 2 weeks, so I actually had some material rather than I'm going to write a novel. I could say, well, at least I've got this. And then with sabbatical coming up, I was able to finish that draft. Now, I was very naive. I really thought that by Christmas I would have a single volume, I'd have an agent in January, it would be published in February, I would be rich in May, I could resign. There's a whole bunch of chairs, English chairs over here, and I'm a former chair, but I didn't want to lay it on Lori's desk, but I did want to walk into the chair one day with my letter of resignation because Marsco had hit it big, but it never happened. So anyway, book one turned into needing book two, and then a character's always talking about the ascendancy of Marsco, which is a book he was writing, and I thought, yeah, duh, I got to write that book too, right? And so that will actually, when it's all published, be book four. And then in 2007, so 10 years later, I was going to be chair starting in August, so I had most of the summer, and I wrote the fourth book that I wrote, but it'll be the third book I publish in one summer, and I'm editing that right now, and some of it I haven't looked at since August of 2007, so it's pretty rough. But the Marsco world is a world, first, the kind of the prequel, and the fourth book will get into this. Before there was Marsco, democracy falls apart, the rule of law falls apart, countries start subdividing themselves up, they don't want immigrants, they don't want certain citizens, and so they just tear themselves apart. And then chaos ensues, as it would, and out of all that chaos, Marsco rises up, this multinational corporation which has space travel and computers, and they say, okay, the world can't have chaos, we're going to take over. And by the time the books start in 2092, Marsco's been in power for 25 years, always promising that they will restore countries and democracies and rule of law and that sort of stuff. So I focus on characters. It's a very character-driven. The first book, The Marsco Dissident, the first chapter is called The Dissident's Daughter, and an adult daughter who is in Marsco and very pleased with Marsco is going to visit her father, who had been in Marsco, still is technically, and is at odds with Marsco, a dissident. And so you have father-daughter tension, of which I know a little bit firsthand, but having one daughter. But she's a good kid. It's all worked out. But the whole premise is, what I tried to do was put real, believable characters in just incredibly tense situations. So it's that's kind of the world.
You had to, in order to create the world that you wrote about, that occurs 25 years later, you had to almost write the whole backstory on what happened when all when things hit the fan.
Yeah.
So what was the order you did that? Did you kind of jump in and do your story and then create the backstory as you went? But and the other thing I wanted to ask about is, as you create, you have to anticipate what technology is going to do, and you have to be consistent through the whole thing. So do you have some master files somewhere back in a back room that says everything we need to know about the Marsco world?
I do have a lot of notes, and no, I didn't plan it out very well. And don't try this at home, okay, viewers? I just jumped in and started writing, which is not the way to do it, and I've learned my lesson. And so I do much more outlining and character development now when I work on a novel than I did then. I just started writing. And what sort of is chapter 5 in the book was the first chapter I wrote. And then I got done with probably most of the books, and I realized I wanted to start with Tessa, who's the dissident's daughter. So I wrote the chapters at the beginning. So no, it was kind of sprawling and all over the place. But I sort of knew, okay, if Marsco's in charge, what did they replace? And so you could just spill something out, and then later sort of think about it. I go in a little bit different direction now, and I do more thinking ahead of time. Like with a novel I'm working on now, I'm trying to make all those problems, at least have notes about all those problems so they're not a surprise to me as I write. But there were a lot of surprises, and of course, no surprise, Marianne will tell you, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, so you want some surprise. But I do work from an outline, and and I kind of knew where I was going with the books. I just didn't know they were going to go into 4 books and go on forever. I was supposed to be rich and famous by now. You know, Steven Spielberg and I'd be on his yacht. You know, I don't know what happened, but yeah, it plotted out better than I did. But it worked. It's worked. I mean, I like it. So I love it.
So you introduced some technological innovations, the whatever you call it, finger discs and stuff like that. Could you talk about what went into deciding what those were going to be? Because it becomes a big part of the book, not only in your first book, but it falls through the whole saga.
It grows through the whole saga. Well, the finger disc is partly the way Marsco controls everything. Is they control the computer. So everything is so computer-based nowadays, and you need these finger implants, finger discs, to have access to computers. There's a few type of computers where you can put a rubber thimble that has the chip, but by and large you need. And the more important you are, the more finger discs you have. You can have them anywhere on your hand. And then if you're really important, you start getting them on your left hands. Now, if you're already left-handed, you're out of luck. You got to start with the right hand. There's no jumping to left hand here. But so you have the finger discs, and that's kind of how they control. And of course, that immediately shows, you know, look, I've got finger discs. I'm important. You know, that's like you're the top 1/2 of 1% or 1/10 of 1% in the world. You run the world. You're an associate, so it's a very important contrivance all the way through, and yeah, it's you know. So I thought about that, and you know, people are doing that. They are putting microchips in their pets. Some computer programmer put one in his own body, had one implanted, so when he walks into his office, his music starts, the lights are adjusted just the way he wants. And I thought, you know, come on, buddy, you're hurting me here. You know, this is supposed to be sci-fi. We weren't going to talk politics, but I can't resist. This one's a legitimate candidate. He did not end up on a ticket, but talking about illegal aliens coming into this country really seriously suggested that they get a microchip under their skin and be tracked like packages. And I saw that and I wanted to write to him, hey, that's copyrighted. That's in my book. You know, you have to get a shout out to me because that's what the PRIMS, which is an acronym like SCUBA or ZIP, you know, so they have to have a disc at the back of their hand. Again, you know, boom, you see that, and it better be glowing the right color. And you know they're at the bottom, which is like 90% of the population, or 99% of the population, 95%. So yeah, somebody sees that you have a scar, that disc was removed, and it means you're kind of allowed to step up into the next level of society. So yeah, I play with that quite. When I say play, that's not a bad thing. You know, it's at play in the book consistently. I hope consistently. Yeah.
So you've created a lot of technologies, but you've chosen to set much of the book in real places. Mm-hmm. I think Sacramento's called Sac City. Why did you do that rather than just, you know, a generic city on the moon or wherever?
Well, I do have colonies, and we are on Mars and spaceships, but I grew up in Sacramento, and I'm visual when I write. I like to have a sense of what things look like, and there are scenes that take place at the state capitol in Sacramento. There are scenes that take place at Sac State. There's a major scene at the beginning of book 2 at what would be Sac State, a future Sac State. It makes an appearance in book 3, significant appearance. So I'm really location bound. I like to kind of really have a sense that it's a real place. And so there are a lot of scenes set at places I visited and whatnot. We were at a wedding a couple years ago in the Black Hills, and we were in one of those beautiful valleys. And another book I'm working on, another sci-fi book, and I go, well, that's this planet. You know, I was just like, whoop. And I was just in London working on yet another book, so I work on a lot of books, but because it'll be a futuristic sci-fi set mostly in London, and it's like, wow, I got a scene at Kew Gardens, I got a scene over here, and so I really like a location and a sense of, you know, this is real, and I kind of know how it looks. And Sacramento built the King Stadium, kind of wrecked part of my landscape, but you know, I got time to tear that down and build up what I want.
Could you define how you look at speculative fiction versus science fiction versus some of the other kinds of fantasy and other kind of genres?
Well, it's speculative, and not, there's no vamps, no vampires, no Walking Dead. It's realistic, because science fiction could be realistic, but it's very political, it's very economic, as Marion read the quote in the Kirkus Review. So it's speculative in the sense I make it near future, and I'm asking the question, what if? What if? And the book in London that I want to, which is after I get these two edited, because they're done. Book 3 and 4 are done. For those of you, I had a very anxious listener that was afraid I wasn't going to publish book 3, and no, it's done. I'm editing it, and book 4 is done. But the next one I want to work at set in London, and I won't give you the title. It's too good of a title. I want somebody stealing it. And I'll give you my elevator pitch. If you can imagine Doctor Who, you all know Doctor Who, and James Bond in near future London on the verge of a possible East-West war, major war, and Jack the Ripper makes an appearance. So that's what I was working on, and you know, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, I got off on a thread. I'm not sure I know how I got there. This is like lecturing when I was here. What war was I talking about? What book? Anyway.
As an English professor, you're familiar with a number of different genres, and I believe you specialize in British literature.
Yeah, the novel.
How'd you end up writing science fiction?
Well, I've always loved science fiction. You know, I was a high school kid when Star Trek came out, and I was teaching high school when Star Wars came out, and so, you know, at least that type of media, you know, I was really, really absorbed with that. But when I was younger, I read a lot of sci-fi. I mean, all the people, and I was on it much more than I am now. I read widely, you know, from Jane Austen, Barker, you know, the World War I novels. I'm into these Maisie Dobbs nurse turned detective novels right now, and I just read Brooklyn, you know, so I just read a lot, and I read a lot of history, and so I consider myself a serious novelist. I might be in the sci-fi genre, but so everything applies. A good novel has characters, it has plot, you know, it's well written. I think I passed the grammar test, you know. And so, because you read some books and you're not so sure that's the way where writing is going to go, you know, Lord help us. But so I mean, writing, I mean, Stephen King, right? Is that the book you're reading about writing? Yeah? Yeah, if you want to be a writer, the two things you have to do is read a lot, write a lot. You know, you got to do both, and so, you know, just do it. I mean, you're right, you know. I mean, these young writers out here, people want to be young writers, you know, if you're not reading something, you're not writing something. I mean, you may be writing something, but, you know, read, write. You get to stop and eat, you know, you can have a boyfriend, girlfriend, that's all okay, but read, write.
I read somewhere where they said it's the genre that draws people to the book to pick it up the first time, but whether they like it or not is all the quality of the writing.
Right. I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. He's not here tonight, but I have he's like myself, retired from the faculty. But he told me, he said, I started reading your book because, you know, I know you from school and everything. I hate sci-fi because that's really not a sci-fi book. He goes, not at all what I expected, you know. So and I've gotten that reaction from other people as well. So it's a damn good book. I mean, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you know, I don't know why you're not reading it, but and his work is good too.
Before we ask some more questions, are there questions from the audience?
Questions from the audience? Yeah, Jan?
So if I understood you correctly, it's book 3. You pretty much finished and set down in 2007?
Yep.
Why such a span in time? And does it nag at you?
It did.
And there's something kind of done but not really done?
Right, yeah. Well, chair of a department, the board of teaching, yeah, those kind of things, you know. I couldn't write much. I did a little bit of writing. I could do a little bit of editing, but around this time of the semester every year, you know, the work, the grading, the meetings, fortunately at this time of the year, the parties, you know, so it was hard to keep up. And so the one thing I have that I mean is, I don't know, by birth, by accident, you know, karma, I don't know what it is, but I can pick something up that I haven't looked at in several years and start in right from where I left off. That's the one thing I don't think anybody taught me. All the rest, how to craft a character, how to develop vocabulary, how to plot something, all the editing skills, you can teach that, or at least practice those things. That's the only thing that I can think. If somebody says, you know, what did you have that other people don't have? You know, it's like baseball players that are good hitters, they have a reverse in their dominant eye, and so they see the ball, you know, differently, and so they can hit better. I mean, that's just an accident of birth. That's the only thing that I can think of that, but yeah, I can pick something up that's many years old and just boom, I'm right back into it. But, funny you should mention book 3. I was reading Maisie Dobbs, and she had a relationship. I don't want to wreck any books here, but anyway, it fell apart. And I thought, you know, that's a better way to handle a relationship than what I'm doing over here, because I had a relationship in book 3 that was kind of a traditional hold hands, fall in love with relationship, which there's nothing the matter with that. And, you know, they're wonderful books to write. But I thought, yeah, it's a complicated world, and, you know, it's just, I'm going to kind of borrow that plot outline and make it. So I have to take out of this rough draft, you know, the scenes of holding hands and everything. And I took out too much, because I took out parts of book 3 that then as I'm reading it along, I go, oh, there was an aspect of that that's a major plot twist that I want. So I got to go back and find those pieces I whacked out and put a few little comments about something of one of the characters that needs to build into something else. So I do forget things, but I you know, on an electronic world, I have the original draft, and I make a copy and then work on it. So, you know, technically I have the rough draft, just like if it had all been on paper in the old days, you'd hold your rough draft in a box somewhere. So I can go find those pieces, and it's just maybe over the last 3 chapters that I've been cutting stuff out, so I don't have to go back to the very beginning, but I'm amused by it. You know, nobody, I mean, except for you guys, will know that story if it ever gets in print and go, oh, this is seamless. Oh, this is, you know, like somehow I just took the pencil off my ear and wrote it down, and it's hard work. I mean, you're a writer, you know, it's hard work to keep at it, but that's what we do. So anyway, thank you. Good question. Yeah. Some of the Marsco started out as a short story, not when I was a kid, but I always wanted to be a writer, and a short story, I mean, a science fiction was always one of the things I wanted to write. So I was always kind of, and I would love someday to open a trunk that my mother kept and you know, find a draft of something I wrote. But, and there are, you know, they did exist, but I think they're gone. And my mother saved a lot, and you guys are all adults. I don't know how TV is going to like this, but the one paper my mother saved from when I was an undergraduate, the professor had taken a rubber stamp and bullshit stamped. I don't know why my mother kept that. You know, that was the one paper my mother kept. But no, I wrote a novel in college, and for the grace of God, knew enough to burn it. It was basically I know now, it was basically fan fiction, which, you know, is good for like practicing grammar, but it isn't really good for your skills. You got to really write your own stuff. But I did write as a kid, and you know, early on. I got in trouble. I love this story. The nuns asked me when I was a little kid, what did I want to be when I grow up? And I said I wanted to be a writer. And she said, well, you have terrible handwriting and you can't spell. And I said, sister, I'll buy a typewriter and I'll buy a dictionary. And she got mad at me for sass, and it's like, I thought this out. You know, I know how to do this. You know, I'm ahead of you here. They, you know, God love them. They were wonderful people, but no. So I always wanted to be a writer, and I always wanted to be a professor. And so far, I did pretty well on the one. You know, the teaching I'm talking about. I'd love to do well on the other. So if you know Steven Spielberg, have him give me a call. I'd love to make it into a movie. Is that, so if you're writing now, keep at it. It doesn't matter if it's what you end up with. The thing is to keep writing. Did you write as a kid?
Not as much as I should have. I read all the time. I wanted to be a writer, but I kept talking the talk.
Well, you had a job
and
and
didn't
I had
do
a
it.
job.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of late 60s guys. We're talking about the 1960s that then decided to go back and do. And I don't think I would have made it if I started out just trying to be a writer. I think I would have either been a hack writer, writing advertisements, which, I guess that's all right.
Well, the thing is, I don't know any writer who doesn't think that they write better today than they did yesterday, that they get better all the time.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to get better is to keep doing it.
Yeah, reading and writing.
Yeah, reading and writing. And you'd mentioned about reading, and I was kind of curious about that. Do you read different kinds of things depending on where you are on the novel? If you're creating something, in the creation mode, are you reading certain kinds of books then, or is it just...
I'm avoiding sci-fi.
Okay.
When I'm writing, I avoid sci-fi just so there's no, bleed over and everything. David Drake, he's going to be in Minneapolis in the spring, and I hope to go to that conference and meet him. But I like some of his things, and there's a couple of, and they're, I don't want to say pulp, because they're well done and they're interesting, but they're serial, and mine are, a series too, but it's Lieutenant so-and-so, and he, blows up this and blows up that, and Marsco doesn't do a lot of blowing up, but and I enjoy that kind, and I love the movies. I love the Star Trek and the Star Wars, and Star Wars is just the opposite of what I want to do, because it always ends in a big military fight, and I don't want it to end in that. Marsco, although book 3 has to end in something like that, but it's going to be way different and horrific. It's not going to glorify the, we got out there and we smote the enemy. It's not going to be Beowulf. It's ugly. The violence in the book. I've had a lot of parents ask me that I have a child who's 12 and really likes to read. Can they read your book? And I say, children don't do well in the book. I don't want to do any plot spoilers, but there's a lot of characters introduced that are children, and their lives are not treated well, and there's a serious aspect of what I'm after in the works, and that is, in any war, in any conflict, there's collateral people, and it's the innocents that get hurt. And again, we weren't going to talk politics, but you look at all of raging hate right now, it's addressed at the people that are the most, the easiest target. They're already marginalized. They're already victims. And I try to capture that in the book, where people who are most vulnerable are often the ones who suffer the most, because you can't gloss over that. I mean, you've got to make people confront that. So the book confronts that. In book 3, I've had that. It's going to be hard. There's a couple scenes coming up that I have to rewrite, and one I have to insert, because at one time I wasn't going to do it. I just couldn't. But I have to put in a very, very violent scene, unjustly violent to the victim, and I'm going to be uncomfortable writing it, to tell you the truth. But it's got to move the plot, and convince readers that that person that did this is despicable, without saying suddenly they were despicable. So, anyway.
One of the challenges that you must face is that you have the plot for each book to take care of, but you also have this overarching saga plot.
Yeah.
And how do you weigh those back and forth, and especially if someone is sitting there thinking, well, I have a book that's going to be 4 books and I haven't started the first one yet. Any advice on how they should be doing that?
Well, if you want to do it, but go in with your eyes open. I did not go in with my eyes open. I promised our daughter, who was 13 or something when I started, that I'd buy her a red pickup truck when the book got published. And, she lives in Sweden now, so I don't have to buy her a truck. But well, get the draft done. I mean, my advice to any writer is, don't tell me what you're going to do. Tell me you'll have a draft. And the first draft is easy. Nowadays, now I'm talking to a really young audience, and some of you, and you probably don't know what this is, but there were these things, and they were ubiquitous, and they were called typewriters. And you had to put paper in and roll it up, and you could only put about 250 words on that piece of paper, and then you had to change it. So if you were writing, every 250 words you had to stop, and do something else. Now you go to your word processing program, which you probably don't even call it that anymore, but that's what they were called, word processing programs. And you open up Word, you save a document, you format it, and you could type until you fainted from hunger, or until your bladder burst, or until, whatever. You could write endlessly without a break. Well, taking a rough draft and moving that into a draft you can work with, to me, is the hardest part of writing. The first draft is easy because it doesn't matter what you put down. You can just, you can have, I mentioned this before, not tonight, but in book 3, as I was writing it, and I knew what this character was like, but I in the same chapter that takes place in the same afternoon, she was 18, 20, and 22. Because as I was writing that chapter, I realized, she's got to be a little bit older. She's got to be a little bit older. So I fixed that. She's 22. But, you can do that kind of stuff in the first draft. But boy, when you have that draft printed out from your printer and you grab your pen and you sit down, that's where the hard work is. To me, that's the hardest work. And then after that, then it really is crafting. It's going back and, have I said this word enough? Get rid of every use of the word suddenly. None of you. Take a vow. Never use the word suddenly.
Suddenly I have another question.
Okay. Do any of you suddenly have another question? Because we don't want to cut you off. We do this gig and yes. Motivated? Have you ever owned a dog? Seriously. Back home? All right, what's the first 2 things you train a dog? Sit and stay. So you, as a writer, especially a fiction writer, sit and stay. You have to be your own coach and believer in it, and you have to say, I'm going to do this. And young people, you got to have a life. You got to form a life. You have to have a career. Most of us that are writers in this room, most of us went into academics, and so. But, so you're balancing a lot. But every week you're going to write 3 days a week or 4 days a week. And don't believe in things. Don't believe in writer's block. Don't believe in silly things like, I have to have this done by Tuesday. That essay due for Professor Baker, yes, that has to be in before. But other things. So you have to give yourself a pep talk. You have to believe in yourself. Because it may not be a bestseller, but it's the best damn thing that you can do, and you don't know where it's going to go. So this is what I miss about teaching, right? Didn't I do this all the time in my class, do these pep talks? I'm sure my students just turned me off after a while, but this is what I miss. I don't miss the grading, and no offense to my colleagues, I don't miss meetings. I don't miss meetings. So did I answer your question? Because now I'm getting off on just kind of, yeah, Susan? Yeah. Well, he will morph into a slightly different character based on a more contemporary president-elect, but Jesse Ventura made an appearance in book 4 as but no need for him anymore. I mean, he was just like the warm-up act. I have a character in book 3. I don't think I'm giving anything away. I took the name Chesney from Chesney Wold of Charles Dickens' Bleak House, which is this gigantic mansion the owners are called the Deadlocks. It gives you an idea of what they're like. And of course, Chesney sounds like Cheney, which may mean something to some of us that are older. Some of you younger folks might not. His smile is always, if it's a smile, it's always slanted. So yeah, he's Dick. Good old Dick makes an appearance, Dick Cheney. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is contemporary. A lot of it's historical. I mean, I read a lot of history. I know a lot about World War II, World War I, the Romans, all. You know, remember the fascists? Remember when they would say, you know, I mean, we thought that was history. But yeah, a little bit of both. Little front page headlines and you know, care and concern that you know, the society, we're good for time. The society's just going nuts. But the sci-fi part, I mean, a lot of it isn't that, you know, we're going to get to the moon. We're going to have colonies on the moon, you know, and the next thing is Mars, and the next thing is the asteroid belt. So that, you know, they're talking seriously about mining asteroids. And a big part of Marsco's finances is mining asteroids. And then there's people who go out and steal and filch, and, you know, so that they're concerned about that. And but that's like a plot contrivance to get other things to happen. So, but yeah, I mean, any time, take the world, put your finger in the stream of time, and there's enough to write about, right? So,
Well,
thank you.
in the storytelling, then it all comes down to characters.
Right.
And you have, I don't know how many hundreds of characters in Marsco. How do you keep them consistent as they go, as you develop them originally and then show character development?
Well, I try to keep them consistent. Zot, who's a major character and a man, was going to be a 12-year-old boy, so he told me off. Nope, I'm not going to do that. And I have a wonderful copy editor who is really invested in the books, and so I had one of my characters say something when she was editing toward the end of book 2, I mean, not chapter 2, and she fired me off one of these all exclamation point notes, you know, which is, you know, not etiquetely not right, you know, to scream at somebody. She would never say that. She would never back down like that. And okay, we'll fix that. So yeah, so some people keep me on the straight and narrow and stuff, but I've gotten emails, you know, I got an email from somebody, book 1, I don't like what you did to this guy. and why'd you do that to this guy? And so they're consistent, I hope.
So do you have to keep a record somewhere so you know that John Doe has green eyes and all those kinds of things?
I've learned, and I got this from Faye Sullivan. Some of you know Faye Sullivan. She's been here. And for those of you that don't, she grew up in this area. She lives in the Twin Cities. And she's got some wonderful Minnesota books. And she did this thing at a Marshall Fest probably 12 years ago now, a long time, because it was after I'd started book 1. But she'll say, okay, this is the character on a sheet of paper, and she does it by handwriting, and I set up a computer file, and she writes everything about the character. She said most of it won't end up in the book, but color of their eyes, who they've dated, who they've been in love with. You know, like I do a lot of warrior people, so what their military rank, where they went to school, all kinds of different things. So I write up quite an extensive description of my characters now, and I did that for book 3, which I think enabled me to write book 3 in 3 months. You know, and that's what I was doing in London when I was there researching the book. Was once I kind of had the plot, I went back and because I couldn't. It's the longest time, and I'm not really sure I like the name, but I had to come up with the name of, you know, the main man in the book, and I'm really struggling with the name. But the other one is a pretty easy name to use because she's using an alias, and she picks such an alias that everybody for the first half of the book's going, that really isn't your name, you know. And so I knew that one, but I have to give her a real name now. But so I do try to have a real sense of what they're like and what they would say, and some of them, in one book I'm working on, there's a kind of an aide de camp, because it's military, so an aide de camp, and every time the fella that he works for is a very, very significant, important general, and related to the emperor, you know, really, really high up there, but every time he gives an order, his response is not yes sir, it's okay commander. You know, so I got that little tag to kind of, so I do stuff like that, play with stuff. When I say play, that's not bad, okay? Don't think playing is doodling. It's like, you know, let the ideas kind of percolate. There's no rules. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but there aren't any rules in writing. The rule is, does it work, you know?
When you mentioned working on 2 projects or 3 projects
Yeah.
or however many at once, don't they ever bleed into each other?
Oh, no, they bleed into my life. It's too many, and that's why I'm going to do. I've made up my mind. I'm going to do that London sci-fi book next for lots of reasons. But I think it's important that you do that as a writer. I think it keeps the writing going. You know, you've got all these ideas and write them down, keep them, create a file. I mean, gosh, with these electronic files now, you get that little, looks like a manila folder, and just put all your Word documents in there. And so, yeah, I've got more novels than I could conceivably write going right now, but it just keeps me going. And but there's a couple serious ones. I want to do the academic book. I want to do the London book, and then there's another. It's a little more military sci-fi because it's a little political struggle, but it's really about who controls the crown and why. And the good guys are parliamentarians, and the bad guys are emperors. You know, emperors' people. So it's a little more. Yeah. I'm self-published. Blame it on Neil here, Dr. Smith. I did the traditional look for an agent. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and probably over 100 query letters. And the publishing world is changing so rapidly. And this is a really good question. It's almost like I planted you for this question. Self-published people, if we do well enough self-published, Barnes & Noble is going to start carrying our books. Now that is kind of like, you know, saying that, I can't come up with a metaphor quick enough here, but it's a big change, because I've been to conferences 10, 15 years ago where they said, if you self-publish, it's the death of your career. And then a few years later at the same conference, there was CreateSpace, the self-publishing people had table after table doing workshops about how to self-publish. So it's very competitive, because just because you're on Amazon, you know, the books are right there, but there's no warehouse with my books. The books exist when somebody orders them. In the old day, the first run would be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 copies. If you didn't sell them in 6 months, they were just remaindered, and that was it, and you were kind of out of luck, and you may end up with a closet with 5,000 books, you know, or 500 or whatever. So I have to do a lot of things. I go out to libraries. I go out to, you know, it's self-promotion. I do a lot on social media. I do ask, I have a Marsco Saga Facebook page. I ask you all to like it. I put a lot of kind of live interactive stuff on, and it's saved. And, you know, if you like it, repost it, because, I mean, this is how, you know, somebody is going to say something, and it's going to be like the one pebble that turns into a couple rocks that turns into a boulder. It's going to be, I feel that's how it's going to be. So I'm self-published. You can put it on Kindle. You can buy it through me. You can buy it. If you like it, anybody, any writer, if you like what you've read by him or her, go to Goodreads, do a review, go to Amazon, say you like it, because they count those. They count those things, and 50 is the threshold. If you get 50 people have reviewed a book, Amazon starts saying, oh, since you read this book, you might be interested, you know, and until you hit that, well, sci-fi, my gosh, it's a pretty crowded field. So, and I'm pretty far from 50, but it's just a brand new world without stealing a title here. It's a brave new world, but the publishing world has changed so much.
Yeah, it's scary. Everybody's out there doing their NaNoWriMo,
Yeah.
and December 1st, there's going to be people who want to see their book published.
Yeah.
And
Don't do it.
they could probably be out there.
Don't do it.
From a technology standpoint.
Technologically, you can do it, but there's a lot of things we could do technologically. Don't do it.
So once a young writer gets their draft done, that manuscript done, what should they do?
Edit. Edit. That's 40, at least 40. How many times do you think you go through a book? Yeah, 40? 4 or 5? Well, you're a better writer than I am. But how many times do you think you go through a book? Yeah. Still, yeah, I know. I pick it up, and ooh, I would do that differently. So yeah, edit, and I have it professionally edited. Kathy Bernardi Jones, and my career is all out of pocket in a way. It could be, you could say it's vanity press or something, but I mean I take it seriously. This is I retired a little bit early, not a lot, but a little bit early to do this full time. Thank you, Marianne. And as she says, you're a whole lot happier when you're writing than when you're grading papers. But so just because you can do something, and we know a couple writers that have done this, that have just rushed things to be online and be published, and there's errors, and you don't want that. You got to treat this like Harper Collins is publishing it, and stick with it.
And use the writers community. I mean, there's a lot of people in this room who are writers, and I've never met a writer that isn't helpful to other writers.
Yeah.
Well, give you some advice. It's a scary thing now that you can listen to a country radio station and they will have an advertisement that if your novel's done, contact us and send us this money and we'll take care of everything. And it doesn't work that way, and they'll just put your money in, and you're still going to have a lot of work to do. I know a lot of writers who have made big time all the way to are just on Kindle, and it's the writer themselves who has to do the marketing.
Oh yeah, it's all self-promotion. I mean, I've been in Rochester and Huron and to do a library presentation about how to get started writing fiction, and I sell a few books and I talk to people, and I'm going to be in Pipestone in December. Some kind of they wanted 3 writers. I don't know where they got my name. I know a few people live in Pipestone, but my name surfaced, and I'm going to do the Young Authors event, which I'm not going to sell any books at the Young Authors event because they're really young, but I'll be taking my How to Get Started as Fiction and making it a little more accessible. Instead of 5 things, I'll probably do 3 and a couple little writing exercises to just kind of, mostly it's going to be a pep talk to those little kids. They're not kids, but you know what I mean. And but I might be up in Wilmer in March, should be in Wilmer at their library doing the How to Get Started thing, and Elaine arranged for me to do a little talk, a little small group, but it was wonderful in Sweden. So I've been international, So you keep plugging away. Yeah. No. I know. Yeah. James Joyce.
In a very credible sort of way. And you can't stop reading these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope people say that of me one day. But yeah, I mean, there's no rules, and whatever rules there were gone. I mean, it was, I hate to smash white men more than they need to be smashed, but it was the suits in New York, and you sent him their work, and then if he liked it, he'd sell it, and it was a real closed club, and that just has just been blown open, and why not take advantage of it? But you better have, I hate to call it a product, but it's a product. You don't want your product sold on cable after nobody else wants to buy the advertisement time and, call 188, and you want your product right there in Target. You want a good product, and so work on it. You're young, take workshops. Don't just because you can do it, rush out and do it.
I think that's a good point about talking about the craft of writing. There are workshops that can help you get better at it, and you with the group. In fact, I see some people here took a class with Judy, and those kinds of things really help. They're gonna help you realize your writing could be a lot better, and there's a lot of things you could do.
Yeah, and there's nothing the matter with your writing getting better. I hope mine's getting better. Yeah, Lori. Yeah.
I just wonder, when you write, do you think about it as a movie? Do you see a movie in your head and you write in terms of what you're going to translate into that other?
Not so much. I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not going to push it away. I'm not one of those writers. Oh no, my work can only be no. I don't have a cape or a beret, but so yeah. But I don't do it thinking of it as a movie. I do it thinking of it as a book. And yes, I would love it to be. Look, I have a PhD from Notre Dame. Do I want Notre Dame to win the national title every year? You bet. Sorry for LSU, but you can't. Notre Dame, But I would like writing to be, who wouldn't? I got a little arrogant edge to me. I don't mind admitting that, in case you haven't noticed. But I'm not sitting there going, I'm writing this for a movie, because then you're not writing a book. And tying in with that, it was at AWP, which is a big national conference, the AWP every year, and it was in LA, so they had a lot of movie people there, and I didn't sell any, didn't sell my book to. But there was an agent. If you have the book published through an agent and you're at a major press, then your agent calls this guy and they work on selling it to the movies. And that's all he does, is take successful books, and he named a couple books and a couple movies, and I don't go to movies that much, so I really don't remember what he said. But they were they were at Marshall 6, so I know this guy. Oh yeah, I sold that. Oh, I sold that. So he's very, very successful. But he said, for you writers out there, if you do sell a movie, they're going to pay you good money for let it go. Don't, there are very few people. J.K. Rowling, I can't pronounce her name, but the woman that did Outlander, have kept tight control over their book as film. And I think Martin with with a book that will never end. I've given up on him. I've given up. But he just said, let it go. Take the money. You're a writer. Write another book. Don't write a screenplay or think that you should write a screenplay. And they're going to change it. They're going to make it into a 3-piece thing, beginning, middle, end. Just let them have at it and buy a yacht. It's all going, okay, I'll take that. But I'm a writer. I'm a fiction writer. I consider myself a serious fiction writer, but I write in science fiction. Yeah, Jan?
Putting aside people that are in the news,
Yeah. Okay. All right.
do you give your characters, the people that live in your books, traits, characteristics, mannerisms of people in your real life?
If I just say yes, can I leave it at that? I mix and match, and I have had people say to me, is this so-and-so? And I usually say, well, probably not, but it probably is. But I mix and match, and let's face it, you're all wonderful. You make wonderful characters. So a little of this, a little of that, but
Well, I thought of that question when you were describing when an author will put
Yeah.
together a composite, they've got blue eyes,
Yeah.
this, maybe that, and then
Visually, yes, especially visually. But I do have a sweatshirt that says, careful, or I'll put you in my next novel. I do have that, which I only wear at home, but, and I have had family members ask me about a couple characters. And I had an uncle and who's passed away. And I had to say to him, one of these characters looks like Grandma, looks like your mother, my grandmother. And I said, it's not. It looks like her. But, and I got teared up, and he got teared up. And I said, I treat her she's a miserable character. She's a miserable person. And I said, that's not Grandma. You know that, right? And he said, oh, I know. And I said, and I wish she'd given us the Christmas cookie recipe, But he's gone, so.
Jim, besides buying and enjoying your 2 books that you have out, what can people here do to help support you as a writer?
Okay, well, Christmas is coming up. every geeky, nerdy guy, gal that you have on your list would love the Marsco Dissident, I assure you. Yeah, buy the books, and like I said, look at the social media, the Marsco Saga Facebook page. There's a Marsco Saga web page, website, if you do like it, put something on Goodreads, put something. Social media is just. I do a live chat. Thursday or Friday afternoon, I'll do a live chat. I've been trying to keep them short. They go about 10 minutes. I start talking. What can I say? I'm Italian, So, but I'm trying to do that. They're not, I mentioned I wrote the book and you can buy the book, so I do a little pitch, but it's not just about, buy the book from me. So I did one on last Friday, which was Veterans Day, about all the World War I literature, history, real books, history books, the poets that you can read. So I spoke about the literature that comes out of World War I. And this week, either tomorrow, it'll probably be Friday, but I'm going to talk about a young adult writer I know and some of the things that she said about writing. And so it's going to be a little pitch partly to her writing, and I should pitch you one day. But so if you see that, you don't have to watch it live because it'll be on the Facebook page. And if you like it, put it on yours. Hey, I know this guy. He was my professor, or and get a taste for what he's like, because that visual, is very, very important. So it's social media that's going to which is driving this kind of stuff. So if you like it, and any of us that are writers, like I say, a review, a bad review is better than no review because they're counting reviews. Now, if your name is Zarzana, you can't do it because they crack down on families or fake reviews. There were some writers paying people to review their books, and then they would get, and I always say Marsco when I mean Amazon. It's not based on Microsoft. If that was the question you were asking about Microsoft and Marsco, it's not. Although Halliburton and the Blackwater Military Group probably are a lot like Marsco. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent.
Well, we'd mentioned the changing world in the publishing world, and other than the top 30, 40, 100 writers, word of mouth is how most of people find out about other writers, and so spread the news.
And even though it's not in a bookstore can order it. If you don't want to go to Amazon, it's great if you go to Amazon, but if you walk into a bookstore, they can order it. Bookstores are reluctant to carry self-published because they can't play with the price, and that's partly what Amazon, has control over. And I don't want to get into the technical whatever about it, but if it's been mass published, then a small bookstore has a 40% range that they can set the price, and they can still make a profit. But Amazon's going to undercut any sale price of anything anybody puts in a bookstore. But if you want to buy it, and you don't want to buy it from me, and you walk into a bookstore anywhere in the Western world, anywhere in Europe, if they can get to, is it Ingram's? Is that the big website? They can pull it out of there, and it's going to cost you full price. But so it's doable, and a bookstore could carry it if they want. Because I'm an alum, the Notre Dame bookstore has it on their bookshelf, which is kind of cool. And the Sacramento room at the main Sacramento library, which is mostly dedicated to the history of Sacramento, all these books about, and there's mine, The Future History of Sacramento, history you don't want to happen. Thank you very much, but there it is, so that's cool. I had to ask them about it, but hey, ask, Anyway, other question. We got time for one more question. Yes, sir. all poets can do is warn, says Willifred Owen. And it really is a warning. I mean, the premise of the book is that democracy falls apart. The whole way that Marsco rises to power is that democracy falls apart because people don't want to pay taxes for the roads, for the hospitals, to take care of the elderly. And it, especially in these last few weeks, sounds so crushingly possible. You know, I grew up in California, and California, Oregon, and Washington are seriously talking about seceding. California would be the 7th largest economy in the world. California could be an independent nation and do very well, thank you. Texas said they would, some members, you know, obviously it wasn't everybody, but they said if Hillary won, they were going to secede. Well, you know what? We're 50 states. We're a nation. We should stay a nation. What the hell is Brexit except for a racist excuse to rant and rage? And since Brexit and since, frankly, Trump's election, the amount of racial violence, violence against gays, my God, I don't know what's going to happen to women. There's a men's group. I'm sorry I'm a man and have to say, there's a men's group that now thinks under Trump they can eliminate all laws about rape. Now think about that for a second. Think about that. Could we have thought about that seriously? Would somebody have said that under Obama or under Bush 1 or Bush 2 or any Republican president, that you could violate somebody and somehow that's going to be all right because those are, you know. So yeah, I write to warn. And hopefully people are listening, you know, not because I'm so special and I've got so, because it's a thing I think any decent person would believe in. Hate is a terrible burden to carry, says Martin Luther King. I always like to give my footnotes, you know. Hate is a terrible burden to carry. And I don't think we should make national policy hate. You know, it's as simple as that. And if I'm offending your political sensibilities, I'm sorry, but and, you know, maybe I'm a 60s kumbaya kind of guy, but, you know, that's what I am. So that's what I write. All I can do is warn. So, thank you. That's a nice question. All of you had nice questions. So thank you. Oh, you want to say goodbye. I mean, you want to wrap up.
Thank you, Jim and Steve. I do want to let you know that we will have one more event this semester, an informal brown bag lunch. It's a craft talk with Richard Broderick, and he wrote a new poetry collection called Jesus at Walmart. That will be on Monday, November 28th, BA 235, and there will be posters going up around campus, and you'll see more information about that. Then next semester, we'll look forward to hosting a reading on Monday, March 20th, once again at the library at noon and 7 p.m. here, featuring poet Susan McLean, author of The Whetstone Misses the Knife, winner of the Donald Justice Prize, and Iowa poet Gwen Hart, whose new poetry collection is The Empress of Kisses, winner of the X.J. Kennedy Poetry Prize. Then our final reading of the spring semester will be on Thursday, April 6th, noon at the library and 7 at SMSU, featuring Andrea Scarpino, poet laureate of the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, and reading from her new book, What the Willow Said as It Fell, and Christine Stewart Nunez, reading from her new poetry collection, Blue Words Greening. And I just want to thank you again for coming tonight, and look forward to seeing you at future SMSU Visiting Writers Series. And please stay around to talk to the authors and buy their books. Thank you so much.
Show them your shoes.
Oh.
When you marry a sci-fi writer, stars. She's
Stars.
got clogs with stars on them. Real stars, not, you know, like, she didn't put those on, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.